And so with that, I want to introduce to you our next speaker, Jim Montgomery, my partner in chili crime. So let me first read out all his accolades, and then you can clap. Having worked extensively throughout South Asia, Southeast Asia, and China, and having lived in Turkey for 9 years as a child, Jim is highly comfortable with the ambiguity that routinely accompanies being an expat. A former Muslim, yes, a former Muslim, Jim is passionate about God's word and leadership. Nothing excites him more than seeing God minister to people, changing their spiritual and physical condition, and lead them to impact others as a result of his word, love, grace, and sacrifice. Jim has a history of success delivering cross-cultural initiatives that support the attainment of evangelical financial transparency, capture efficiency improvements, and drive multi-million-dollar global programs throughout the world. When not exploring, Jim, his wife, and 3 young children reside in Marion, Iowa. I now know where Iowa is. They can be found seeking outdoor adventure, especially fishing, downhill skiing, and creek stomping, which I still hope he shows us sometime. Welcome, Jim.
Well, again, it's a pleasure to be here. I hope you all have been as blessed as I have been just listening to Phyllis and everyone else. Martin, it was a pleasure. You are so comfortable here. I almost want to bring you back up. So it's exciting to be here in South Africa. This is probably one of the warmest countries I've ever traveled to. And I don't mean physically, in a sense, temperature-wise, but just the people. The people are very, very warm. And I praise God for that. So we've had an incredible greeting here. And we have been just cared for, hospitality-wise. It just makes us want to come back or even stay. In fact, we don't even want to go back. We just want to stay here. So anyway, what I'd like to share with you is a little bit about the vision of Lead Like Jesus and what is happening around the world. And when we talk about leading like Jesus, we're embracing who we are, whose we are, and who we are. And without knowing whose we are and who we are, it's actually impossible to lead like Jesus. And as Phyllis has shared, this comes from deeper relationships, a deeper relationship and walk with Jesus. In the book, The Hour That Changes the World, Dick Eastman writes, "What we do for the Lord is fully dependent on what we are in the Lord. What we are in the Lord is wholly dependent upon what we receive from the Lord. And what we receive from the Lord depends or is directly proportional to the time we spend alone with the Lord in prayer." And plain and simple, the vision that Jesus has for us is to go and make disciples in all the world, to share his love and his plan. The good news is that the harvest is ripe for harvest. It's ripe for making disciples. There's tremendous hunger around the world. And people are tired. They despair of their lives and their futures. Some have suffered under corrupt and wicked leaders, violent leaders in some cases. Some of the places I travel around the world in Asia, I've seen graphically, physically violent people being abused, or people being abused under violent leaders. And people who are caught up in these countries are full of corruption and bloodshed, are desperate for a new way of life. During the Lead Like Jesus encounter in Nigeria, you could actually hear the battle going on between Boko Haram and the soldiers, the military there. During the times of breaks that we would have, they would go out and they could just hear it in the foothills, the fighting taking place. And at one time, when our group had finished an encounter in Nigeria, and this is northern Nigeria, everyone had to flee that city. We had just finished the encounter in time to flee the city because Boko Haram had just captured one city and it was moving into that city. We were preparing for another bigger battle, though, using God's truth to make a better world. And that is why it's so important that we have a big, bold vision for Jesus, a vision like Jesus. Now, I just want you to imagine a world in which leaders serve rather than rule, a world in which leaders give rather than take. We imagine leaders who seek to produce results from service and sacrifice rather than from power and position. And in terms of leading like Jesus, there is no plan B. There is no option B. Not so with you. And Jesus makes that very, very clear. There is no other type of leadership that Jesus validates. Okay? And amazing things happen. Let me just go on here. Amazing things happen when people are exposed to a new model of leadership. In many countries, we've seen churches double in size after taking their clergy and lay leaders through an encounter. We've seen schools and communities transformed when those who lead are exposed to a new way of leading. I'll give you an example in India. A private Christian school in India, in Chennai, which is on the southeastern coast of India, took its teachers to the Lead Like Jesus encounter. The teachers were deeply affected, and the students quickly recognized that something profound had actually occurred. The teachers went from saying, "You need to listen to me, you need to obey me," to actually serving the students and seeing each child as the object of God's affection. The experience also changed how the teachers related to each other. There was once so much backbiting and fighting. Where there had been so much backbiting and fighting, there was deep change and transformation. Teachers began meeting together every single morning to pray before heading off to the class. They began leading with a serving heart. As part of the process, the students at that school went through their own program, which you just saw, Ignite. We call it Ignite. Ignite is like an encounter, but tailored specifically for youth. As you would imagine, it's highly interactive and video-driven to engage them. So we took the students through Ignite, and the teachers saw a complete change in the hearts of these students. Many were quite honestly problem kids who'd come from very poor families. But the training led to a dramatic change. The students began to take ownership of their school. They began cleaning up and helping out wherever they could. One teacher had asked a student what they were doing. They said, "This is my school. I need to care for it." And the students rallied. One student said, "Listen, we need to take this to my friends. I've got friends in such and such school. We could take it to that school and have it change their lives and change that school." An entire school system had changed. So that's just one example that the change that can occur when we expose Jesus' own model of leadership. And the key is, as we have done here in South Africa, the key is to find that one man, one woman of peace, the champion to carry the message in their own country. This is someone who's able to draw other people to themselves in an unthreatening way. We're talking people that show humility and have a heart and a passion to lead like Jesus. Usually they're tied to a larger ministry that has a much greater network. From that one person, we develop a team of facilitators to spread the message. Different facilitators with different with different spheres of influences, with different assets. The demographics of the team expands, drawing in other people, and they're able to reach the university campus, the schools, churches, ministries, even among indigenous church planters and into the marketplace, where we can begin to influence business leaders. The training of church planters has phenomenal grassroots impact and indigenous impact within a country and a community. When trained to lead like Jesus, church planters not only develop a church that leads like Jesus, but a whole community that will begin to lead like Jesus. They work together to develop cash crops, which help provide sustainability for the entire community. The impact is incredible, with everyone pertaining to that village, including the schools, have opportunity to know Jesus and lead like him. And an exciting outcome is that when churches are planted in these places where there is no church, in an indigenous village, a rural village, it can be on the outskirts of a town, families come to know Jesus through their children that is from a newly planted church. It happens all the time. Ongoing, sustainable change. Many of these church planters go on to plant more than one. I met one church planter who had planted over 100 churches in a period of 8 years. In a place called Ado Ekiti, Nigeria, one church planter went through an encounter And he would say there was a massive boost in passion after the encounter. It was a wake-up call, influencing him, the village work, and globally in the vision toward reaching 100,000 people and a village chief. People, we have the ability to reach nations by way of the university, the marketplace, the church, high schools, and development of grassroots ministry movement. Excuse me, through church planter training. Still water, please. Thanks. Every country we go into, we have this scope of ministry. I just want to make it clear. From when we go into a country, one of the neat things that does take place is that we go into the fact that Lead Like Jesus can actually go into the schools, go into the university, into the marketplace. That is a scope of ministry that can take place in any country that we go into. Excuse me. In the Philippines, our facilitators are very well connected in the marketplace. A businessman named Boris Joaquin is our national representative there and has been very successful in taking Jesus to the corporate world. Boris had reached his own company, but others as well. His message is as simple as it is irresistible. He basically would approach these organizations, these corporations, and say this very thing. We use the person Jesus as a model of leadership, and this is what you can expect to see happen, or the impact you can see happen in your company or organization. And that message attracted the attention of companies like Toshiba, whose HR folks first went through an encounter. After that, they called back and said, we want you to take all your departmental managers through this training. Yamaha got word of it. You've heard of Yamaha. They got word of it, and they wanted the same thing to happen with their company. And then this last year, Toyota came on board. So this model of Nationals Training National is bearing fruit. Thanks to expanding international partnerships, Lead Like Jesus launched ministries in several new places during 2015, including Malaysia, Vietnam, taking it to places like Egypt. And this is one of the ways we actually have translations done. We also have a presence in the African nations of Niger, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Uganda. Some of these countries have taken our ministry to Burundi, the Sudan, Zimbabwe, and other places. The crossover potential, that is when a country moves into another country, is huge. This is one of the best ways to reach hard-to-reach places in transforming leaders, places we would never be able to reach. I think it was this last February, India was in Nepal. So, isn't that exciting? That's one of the ways we can see it happen. But students, in Nigeria, we were able to reach over 13,000 students, high school students last year, and influence their relationship with the Lord. As you guessed, Nigeria is an extremely corrupt country, but students there were able to see a new model of leadership. In that country, are now being invited into the public schools, not just the Christian schools. So even more young people who do not know the Lord are coming to an understanding of who Jesus really is. We're also seeing an incredible impact on those who do know Jesus. We're talking about pastors, lay leaders, missionaries, ministries, people that have been in ministry and who have known the Lord for quite some time. And they've come into a new understanding of the influence they can now have as godly leaders. I was in Cairo in September of this last year, where 125 pastors from remote areas of Egypt had come together, some from very severely persecuted areas and backgrounds. What they normally would receive in a training, if you would imagine, is a session that is purely teaching and lecturing. They were used to being lectured to, and so they would sit quietly. There wouldn't be a lot of interaction or sharing. And interesting enough, sharing or direct openness in that culture is not common. Saving face is. So, but as they went through the encounter, I struggled with trying to pull them away from laughing so much and engaging so much. It was an amazing thing to see. It was hard to get onto the next lesson, in fact. they had never encountered something like this before. One individual kept looking at me from a distance as if he deeply just wanted to say something to me. And I noticed him right away because we were the only two with different colored skin. And I'm half Turkish, but my dad, he's Scottish-Irish. Therefore, Jim Montgomery is my name. So, and if you wondered why someone like me would come from an Islamic background with a Jim Montgomery name, that's how it happened. So, so I have this picture of him standing and looking. Finally, as I was passing by, I got close to him, and he approached me, and he said, "You have just given everyone exactly what they needed. You have inoculated them with the Holy Spirit." And you can imagine these pastors are off on their own. I mean, this is a hard country. We're talking Egypt, where a lot of persecution, church burning, and all that stuff does take place. Honestly, every time I do an encounter, I'm surprised by the level of impact that happens and the transformation that happens. The exercises draw them in, as you would imagine. The discussions and interaction that they have are priceless. Sometimes you can just leave them sitting there for hours just discussing one thing, and they're just captivated by that. Another time there was a pastor who was chairman of the Indonesian Bethel. And if you can imagine, Indonesia has 18,000 islands in that country. And this group, he's the chairman of the Indonesian Bethel, which is about 5,000 churches, and which has about 2.5 million members. I heard him say before a group of 650 pastors, this is not a training program. This is a movement, and this is the impact. This has literally transformed my life. And it's so true. We call it training and leadership development, but what we're doing is discipling leaders. And that's what we like to say. Simply by modeling Jesus, we see hearts changed instantly. When they do the exercise of washing someone's feet, the impact is huge. Some people have never washed the feet of another person. Can you imagine that happening in Toyota? Can you imagine that happening in Toshiba in the marketplace? Isn't that amazing? That's what they get to go through. I want you to imagine also to see a paramount chief from the Ewe tribe in Ghana, a chief wash the feet of a subordinate. It's unheard of. That, my friends, is a showstopper. It stopped everyone to watch that take place. And what I would like to make sure of, what I want to make sure that each of you here, if I could say anything today about the vision of Lead Like Jesus, is that we are just getting started. We really are. And we're so thankful that you guys are here, but we are really just getting started with what God is going to do through these leaders. There's so much potential. When I think of our 5-year expansion, we really see 70,000 nationals being trained. We see 300,000 students experiencing Ignite for the first time and going on to influence their family and friends. We see 4,000 church planters being trained to go on and plant 4,000 churches in targeted areas, sometimes persecuted areas, and the development of a church that leads like Jesus and a community that leads like Jesus. This year, and because of many of you, we are on target to train 10,000 nationals. And when I say nationals, I hope it's not offensive, but when we think of nationals, we think of, we're a ministry of raising up leaders. And when we think of champions coming into a country, or champions that are champion a country, I think of our master facilitators here, Jason, Lynette, and Travanica, and our dear brother, Jeffrey. These guys are champions, and they are seeing tremendous progress here. And so I view them as nationals here, nationals training nationals. And this is a wonderful event that we're having here. The fact that I'm here, the fact that Phyllis is here, but the real work and the real ministry is you all doing the work in your country. You're going to influence more people than we would ever imagine to do so. This is a one-day thing that we're here for. All right? And so this year, We expect 10,000 nationals. We're on target for that. 30,000 students to be trained, and 300 church planters who will go on to plant more than 300 churches in a period of 18 months. So I hope your heart has been open this weekend. I hope you've been blessed. And as I've shared, this is a message that translates everywhere. And from the marketplace to the indigenous village, into every language. And so we need to take it everywhere.